This story is of my own original creation. Please do not use my story, characters, or voice without my permission. Chica's Diary, Chapter 1. Bring Me That Horizon. Dear Diary, we found land! We've been sailing for years. Well, Cup says it's only been a year, but it certainly didn't feel that way. If only Lafayette wasn't such a deep sleeper, especially on the waves. We could have both shared the scene together. The sight was blurry and barely even the size of a berry, but I couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. All my doubts were behind as I gazed on. A rushing excitement and anxiousness moved my legs and pulled my arms. I steered the ship towards its destination and let Lady Nature's powerful gift carry us. Our vessel dug into the horizon, cutting through the blurring image to clearness. In my excitement, Cup pulled me from my trance and warned me of danger. I looked over the edge and spotted the fins of sharks darting to our vessel. They began circling the boat, preparing to hunt just as I was, with my trusted bow eagerly drawn. I brought the first hit, releasing an arrow that flew straight through the fin of one. The wise ones knew there was no honor to be gained, and fled, leaving one glory-seeking shark to challenge me. Its fin was the largest of the pack, and its color, brightly blood, marked itself among the ocean. It gathered speed, then leapt up from the water, slamming down on the deck of our boat. As it was thrashing about, teeth searching for its next meal, and tail smashing into our vessel's sides, I realized it wasn't a shark. Lauren spoke of these creatures in stories. Sharks, creatures of luxurious fur that water glided over and didn't soak, whiskers sharp as thorns, and piercing eyes for stalking prey. The shark, with immense strength, leapt at me, and I dived to its side, barely managing to avoid its razor whiskers. I pulled out my dagger, and, with her spirit, I plunged her deep into the beast's eye. The animal flailed desperately, attempting to flee to its turf, but I took an arrow from my sheath, unable to retrieve my dagger, and fully blinded the beast. It helplessly squirmed, slowly forfeiting the hunt until it admitted defeat. Pup cheered and ranted over the beast with vicious words like thrashing bites. I couldn't help but smile at his overwhelming spirit, then glanced over to the opposite, Lafayette, still deep in dreams, beside the corpse. I don't know whether to be envious or annoyed of him. Like Cup, I itched to harvest, but I had my priorities straight. The wind was weak, so I grabbed onto the oars and rowed with all my strength towards land. When we came ashore, the ocean's cold winds and water no longer surrounded me, so I immediately removed my heavy coat. It felt good to feel Lady Nature's gifts on my skin again, and I felt like a bear who had shaken off the gathering burrs from their pelt, so glad to be removed from such a burden. Again, I thought of Lafayette and how he can endure these things. His armor weighs so stalwart, wearing it constantly must take a toll, but I've yet to see him truly remove himself from it. At least he was always prepared, which I admired. I turned my attention to the shark's corpse, with Cup eagerly awaiting me. I retrieved my loyal dagger from the eye of the mighty beast, and then ripped out my arrow from the other. It is best to be prepared for your hunt, and I made sure this land wouldn't leave me empty of my sheath. If that land was deprived of sturdy wood or malleable stone, I had ordered these arrows to be forged of melted earth. They weigh heavier, but that is a trade I would take for such resilience. Even from such a violent exit, they remained stalwart as Lafayette's shining armor. Then I harvested the shark for all of nature's bounties. As I carved into its flesh, I decided it was a good time to create a new asin. I took some of the beast's skin and fashioned a bag, taking a bone needle and sewing the skin with flexible twine. Cup honored me with his thought of design, the patterns of a forest, then a fire at the center, surrounded by honorable hunters, homes, and mythological beasts, which I painted on with what we had. When the ascent was done, I felt the smooth, rubbery fur texture, which brought memories of ancient stories being sung. The words lingered in my ears and my heart. My mind turned to what stories I myself could tell if I ever chose to return home, while I took a bone from the chark and placed it in my new ascent. I stepped onto the new land for the first time, and I found that the sand was pale. It was the color of a seashell, not blackened ash. I walked down the beach, just staring at the sand, when I came across a small clutch of harvestable eggs. Bless her for the small bounties. I could have continued searching the beach, but I wanted to move deeper, traversing more towards the grassy plains until I got to this small farm. I took out the Xofy map, and its ocean faded away, bringing in the image of the island from afar, high in the fleece of the sky. I could see no farm on the map, so I stored it away and relied on aid. I walked up to what I assumed was a house, as there was a door and windows attached to its walls, and I looked through the window. After spotting a figure in the house, I knocked. The lady who came out was wearing a soft-looking dress, soft as a cat walks, and was kept in very good condition. I was shocked at how well kept it was. Her eyes were narrow, again like a cat, and they opened a little in shock as she spotted me. Wide-eyed, her gaze rapidly scanned across my body and skins. I introduced myself, asking if I could take shelter in her house, as it seemed large enough, and she shortly replied no. I heard a man ask who was at the door, to which she promptly said no one, despite me being present. She returned to look at me, this time with narrower eyes and a stern look on her. A child with soft clothes, too, ran up and stood beside her, his gaze also purely focused on me. Water trailed down his lip like sap on bark, and he claimed I could stay in his room. Another child, elder of the two, but only by a few years, came rushing up and imitated his brother, eagerly attempting to convince his mother. Their mother pushed her children and her words that I couldn't stay, but told me of an elder who'd know of a place where I could stay, after which she slammed the door without telling me any directions. Cup stopped me from knocking again, stating, "That swine isn't going to help us." I waved my hand through him, sternly telling him that he shouldn't call a stranger that. We barely knew her, and I thought she seemed trustworthy. Like wild animals, it's natural for people to be cautious. Speaking of animals, we ran into a tusk hog in the woods as we were following some pathway that led away from the farm. It was nice to see a familiar beast in an unfamiliar place. I took an arrow and finished the hunt before it could spot me. I harvested its body, adding another bone to my ass, and as we followed the path, we came across a split, which we decided on taking the left route, which brought us to a town. We approached the largest building, and I peeked through the windows. I screamed at the embarrassing sight, instantly looking away. I was so shocked. These people place windows in their bathrooms? Why would you allow such a vulnerable position to be shown? The man, a hunched over elderly person, opened his door and argued with me. Understandably, he was mad, but didn't yell. I apologized, explaining my position, and we debated about windows for a moment before coming to an understanding. The elder invited me and asked how we found this island, as visitors were scarce, and I explained the Zoffy map I was gifted. He was surprised to see such a powerful map, especially since he explained their own people held no maps of their island. He asked if I could gift him my own, which I couldn't part with, but I attempted to carve its likeness into the wall of his house. Cup said it looked like chicken scratches, which I agree with. I ruined this poor elderly man's wall. Luckily, the man was very kind and appreciated my attempt. He pointed out on the map where I could find this lady who had a spare room I could ask for. We journeyed down the pathway, heading up the unexplored split of the road. As we traveled, I spoke to Cup about what this house would look like. The houses here are much more angular with triangle roofs. Since this lady was a fisherman, I wondered if the house was similar to the ones in Bazafar, stilted homes over the shore's water, or maybe even a boat home. My theories were destroyed as the path led upwards, towards the cliffs near the water's edge. The woman's home was similar to that farmhouse, but sat closely to the edge of the cliff. I knocked on the door first, learning my window lesson, and was greeted by this wonderful lady. She was elderly, but not as much as the elder of the town, I guess roughly about twice my own age. She wore a soft dress as well, but it was worn, clearly loyal to her. It held her body firmly in place. Remnants of a harvest were scattered across her gloves. She had gentle eyes like Lauren's, and even her hair grew long like his, though Lauren's hair would swoop like the coming and going of waves. Her hair was twined together into a sort of vine that laid enviously on her shoulder. I was a bird in a trap until she spoke, from which she gently freed me. She asked who I was and what I was doing here. I told her we needed a place to stay, which I am embarrassed to recall. She was confused about the plural, but was sweet to accept me in. I was worried, as I explained to her, that I was accompanied by my brother. To my surprise, she was very kind, and even said hi to Cup, completely looking where he wasn't. But it was the effort that was gracious. As I stepped inside, glancing over to Cup, who was gazing at me with a knowing smirk, I glared back at him, to which he held up his hands passively and looked away. My host graciously pointed out the spare room, and when I entered, I was shocked again. I asked her what this bed was doing on the table, and she laughed smoothly, like how water touches the skin. She explained that it was the bed, the whole thing. How strange this new place was, but it wasn't so unfamiliar. I situated myself where I could, my ascent by my bed, and my weapons above me. I wondered about my host, and looked out to see her in a seat reading a book. I asked her what it was about, then she replied with something that made my heart warm. Turns out she can't read. My host only pretends to, passing the time by imitating literacy. I offered to read her the book, and she eagerly passed it on to me. As I began to read out loud the story of a mythological white whale, my host hung on every word. It was like watching a fledgling take flight for the first time, and like a fledgling, my heart soared into the sky. She was so attentive and glad of my company. I was just happy I could offer something in return. It was an amazing day, full of experiences. I feel as though everything is coming together, and I absolutely hadn't forgotten about anything or anyone whatsoever. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2. Reunited. Dear Diary, I woke up this morning to the smell of salt and fish. That smell of the ocean, it reminded me of waking up beside Lauren. As uniquely as leaves curve when fluttering to the earth, it wasn't certain who'd wake first. If it was Lauren, he'd open up the window for me, and I'd be stirred by the noise of rushing water beneath us. If it was me, I'd open the window and take the air to my soul to refresh it. It'd be easy to drink and taste light. Then that loneliness rekindled in me as those peaceful memories were now disturbed. I refocused on preparing myself, fixing my sheath to my side and my loyal weapons to my skins, before searching for my host. I found the lady by her fire. A pot of melted earth stood in the flames. She took the pot's handle, her gloves resilient to the scorching, and she poured a fishy scented liquid into a cup. When she took immediate notice of me, she brought the cup over, the smell of saltiness blessing my senses. She held it out softly in offering. I dipped my tongue in the pond of the cup, then instantly my hands and mouth acted on their own desire, pouring searing liquid down my throat. I shook off the pain as the satisfying taste overwhelmed me. It was lighter than a soup, but heavier than water, and it tasted like oysters. I looked up at that brilliant woman, finding it so wonderful that she'd be so talented in cooking, much like Lauren. My locked gaze was freed as Cup remarked how disgusting it looked. My brother was never a fan of seafood and much preferred the bounties you could harvest from Earth's fur. He annoyed me, continuing his attack on my preferences, but it was good he broke me out of my spell. I tried to thank her, only to then realize I hadn't asked for her name. My siblings always said manners were lost on me, but I feel so silly to have forgotten the basics. I laughed too loud and too short as I asked for her name. She laughed back, perfectly fitting her tone, and introduced herself as Lady Jane. It was certainly a pretty name. I wondered about what its meaning could be. In Chica, we bring purpose to our names. My own comes from Chica and Taxi. It meant beaked hunter, precise and nurturing. Cup's name is much more direct in origin. It means quick to learn or short to fill. Maybe her name meant nothing, much like Lafayette's or Lauren's. With Lauren, I gave a meaning to his name as it reminded me of the laurels that grew between his tribe and mine. We used those laurels for healing potions. Well, I suppose a name doesn't need a meaning, but it's just nice. Lady Jane and I sat on her couch and talked for a bit. She was so curious of my origins and travels here that I ashamedly smiled. There was so much I could have said, but only managed to say little as my tongue lay decayed in my mouth. When she asked me how I slept, I joyfully exclaimed my pleasures of sleeping here compared to the boat. I was freezing on the fields of water, and I could only rest shortly, as Lafayette was a deep sleeper, and I had to regularly cover more time looking out for dangers than he did. Then, as I said that, it struck me as fearfully and worryingly as an image of a fanged brush pouncing. I had left Lafayette on the boat. I didn't excuse my sudden sprint, as I was overtaken by fear. How could I abandon my loyal companion or forget his life? The fear I felt was not dread, for I knew Lafayette's skills and what a great warrior he was, but it still brought me great pain. If any harm were to be done to him, and I was not there by his side, I would willingly cast myself to the skies to be hung with the stars, for I would have failed him. In my crazed dash, before not much distance was run, I quickly dipped back inside to finish Lady Jane's tea out of manners. As I ran, my stomach was still light, so I took from my pouch dried meat, and I held it hard against my teeth like a wolf. Tup commented how I looked like a student from the Xofy tribe, quickly rushing by with food in their mouths, as they were so strict on time. I remembered seeing it when we had visited once. It was a strange but amusing sight. It lifted my spirits a bit. When we reached the split in the dirt path, I caught my breath quickly and was ready to run again until Cup slowed my mind and pointed up one of the paths. Shining in the distance, stalwart and heavy as always in his jog, was my loyal companion, Lafayette. I was so overwhelmed by relief, I nearly hugged him, but, like a hand to fire, I hesitated as I saw he was covered in yolk. I was so baffled, and quickly was eager to hear the tale. Before he did so, he lifted his helmet and licked some of the yolk off his shield, partly cooked from the goddess's flaming gift. It confused me, but reminded me of when he'd lick his plates clean after every meal. Perhaps that is why he did so, licking half raw yolk from his shield. In between licks, he told me his tale. Upon waking up, Lafayette went in search of me. He did not follow the shoreline, instead, treading the trees and bushes. In his search among the leaves, he found two children playing with sticks. He asked for help, to which the eldest of the boys took to defend his brother and held his large stick up honorably. Lafayette, a master of his weaponry, quickly wrapped the chain of his flail around the stick and pulled it from the boy's hand. He spoke gentler this time, speaking of only needing directions and help to find me. The boys were convinced after hearing he was an ally of mine, and they brought him to their farm. The kids told their mother of my loyal companion, and, as Lafayette recalls, shutted the door without much word or hospitality. With no direction, he followed the dirt path. On his journey, Lafayette told of a beast which blocked his way. It was feathered as a chicken, and its beak and neck were largely outstretched. It had wings twice as large as palm leaves on its front legs, standing just a foot taller than I am. The beast stared my companion down, crying loudly and opening its beak to show rows of thorny teeth. It was challenging Lafayette to a hunt. Lafayette, stalwart in stance, held his ground as the beast pecked his shield, or tried to find any angle which could allow it to bite him. When no opportunity arose, it jumped, gliding in the air, then dropping a large egg onto Lafayette. He blocked the assault from above, his feet pressing heavy against the ground at the impact, but now the beast had an ample strike to his chest. Unknown to the beast, Lafayette had no fear, as his faithful armor was strong as the earth. The beast swerved its lengthy neck as it landed, its beak clamping to bulk, its thorny teeth making no mark as it grinded against melted earth. Now the beast laid vulnerable, locked on Lafayette's chest, and Lafayette bashed his shield downward on the tender line where hard beak met feathers. The beast's head dropped down to the ground, dazed. In a pathetic retreat, the beast tried to back out of the hunt. Lafayette would not allow it to, wrapping the chain of his flail around its skinny leg and forced it to obey his will. With one crashing strike of his shield, the beast felt empty at its neck, and Lafayette was honorable. I drank every word hungrily, like farmland soil. It was a joyous feeling to have him by my side again, and his tale only made me feel more confident in my companion. He had left the corpse far behind when he eventually reunited with me. I frowned, knowing the bounties that the beast could offer were now given to the scavengers. Still, just the imagination of being in the hunt brings a rush of life to my spirit. Cup, too, was eager, far more eager. He always loved to hunt, and he gave that salivating look when Lafayette reached the hunt of his story. Such a prized beast. What would its flavor be? My mouth is slick, and my hunger is a hole. I will write to you later, diary. End of chapter 2. Thank you so much for listening. I was inspired to rewrite my D&D notes from the campaign I'm in with my friends when I read The Odyssey for my class readings. You can probably see the inspirations. Each chapter is a session I had in the campaign. So the first one, unfortunately, my dear friend David was unable to show up to play his character, Lafayette. So we started with just me. In the second, we reunited, and it was a blast. I do my best to retain as much of the original content and jokes that we made along the way in our D&D sessions. So this is a very faithful and dramatic retelling of the events. Hopefully you enjoyed listening. Goodbye. Speaking of animals, we ran into a tusk hog in the woods as we were following some pathway that led away from the farm. It was nice to see a familiar beast in an unfamiliar place. Oh, shit.